World War I in the Middle East. Now, commonly, we think of World War I as a European war, but its impact in the Middle East was profound. The war experience in the West and on the Western Front is well known, and it was devastating. There were 35,000 miles of trenches dug in the West. 8 million people were killed. 4 million of those were in Western Europe and Western Europeans. 4 million were Russians. The Ottoman War, though, also brought a terrible death toll and destruction to the Ottoman army and to Middle Eastern societies at large. The Ottoman army was never larger than 650,000 men, even though the Ottomans conscripted over 3 million. Desertion, sickness, and casualties took a tremendous toll. Total war dead were 770,000. 250,000 were killed in action, 450,000 deaths due to disease, 60,000 went missing. Wounded were 760,000, but 1.5 million probably deserted throughout the war. The war also brought terrible devastation to the civilian populations of the Middle East. Anatolia, the region that's today Turkey, after World War I, was in total chaos. About 25% of the population, as close as we can estimate, died. They were either killed or displaced. Anatolia went from 13 million people to 10 million people. The Armenians were ethnically cleansed, and many were killed, about 1.5 million in Anatolia. 600,000, we believe, were killed. The rest were driven out. The Greek Orthodox Christians in the west of the country, another 1.5 million, were driven out in the years right after World War I. Perhaps 300,000 were killed. Christians, who had made up close to 1/5 of the Anatolian population, were almost entirely destroyed. Today, Turkey is less than 1% Christian. Of the Muslim population of Anatolia, about 2.5 million were killed. Population transfers were also immense. About 400,000 Muslims were kicked out of Greece and sent to Anatolia. This was in exchange for the Greek Orthodox, who were being sent from Anatolia to Greece and numbered well over 1 million. Arab populations also suffered tremendously from starvation and the chaos of war. An estimated 500,000 Arab civilians died of war-related causes in the Ottoman Empire due to famine and disease. In the little region of Mount Lebanon, the population of which was about 400,000, some 100,000 died in the Great Famine of the war, and many left to the United States and other places. So how did World War I begin? We all know of the assassination of the Austrian Archduke Francis Ferdinand in Sarajevo, which is a city was in Yugoslavia and Serbia, on June 28, 1914. This is really about nationalism. The Serbs wanted independence from the much larger Austro-Hungarian Empire. Gavrilo Principe, a young 20-year-old Serb and member of a terrorist organization called the Black Hand, shot Archduke Francis. The Austro-Hungarians were infuriated, and they wanted to smash the Serbians. But how could one assassination in such an out-of-the-way place like Sarajevo spark an international war, a world war? The short answer is the alliance system of Europe. Europe was divided into two grand alliances. The Entente Cordiale, made up of France, Russia, and Great Britain, faced off against the Central Powers, made up of German Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire. Before the Austro-Hungarians felt that they could attack the Serbs and take vengeance for this act of assassination, they turned to the Germans, the Kaiser of Germany, Wilhelm, to ask for backing. They did not want to go to war against the Serbs unless they could be sure that they would have an ally if Russia attacked them. The Russians looked at the Serbians as fellow Slavs and could easily have entered into this war. So this set in motion the two alliance systems. Germany told the Austro-Hungarians, go do it, we'll have your back. Russia did declare war on Austro-Hungary as soon as they went after the Serbs. And this kindled the von Schlieffen Plan, a German war plan that led to World War. What was the von Schlieffen Plan? It was to take out the Western Europeans before turning to get the Russians. The Germans had built a tremendous railroad system from one end of their empire to the other. They wanted to use their technological advantage in order to move all the German troops across the railroads, take out France first, because France was an ally of the Russians. They believed that Russia was so backwards, it didn't have railroads, it didn't have a good road system, that it would take at least 4 months for the Russians to mobilize their troops, get them to the front lines, arm them, so that they had a window of these 4 months in which to conquer France and then move their troops back on the railroads across to the Eastern Front in order to confront the Russians. This meant that they had to attack France. So the shot in Sarajevo led to a German attack through Belgium into France. This war that everybody thought was going to be over in a matter of a few weeks, that it would be a blitzkrieg, turned into a very slow-moving war, a war in the trenches. Nothing was planned to go like this. And the warring sides became bogged down. And that's why, in some ways, the Middle East became such an important war theater. Because the British wanted to break out of this trench warfare and relieve pressure on the Russians as well. And they thought of taking out the Ottoman Empire. That if they could destroy the Ottoman Empire, go for the underbelly of this big alliance, Central Alliance, that they could force the Germans to move their troops from the Western Front down towards the Ottomans. They would also relieve pressure on Russia. And don't forget that the Russians were sagging under the weight of war. They were unable really to fight the First World War, and they would collapse in the Russian Revolution, 1917. The British were looking at this. They were very anxious that the Tsar would drop out of the war, and they wanted to relieve pressure on the Russian military. And that led to the Middle Eastern war theater. The Entente powers declared war on the Ottomans in November 1914. The strategy was simple. While Russia attacked the Ottomans in the north, in the east, Great Britain was going to attack the Ottoman Empire from 2 points. One, going up through Iraq from Basra up the Tigris River to attack Baghdad. And the other, more important plan was to send an army to take Istanbul. The British believed that they could cut the head off the snake, go right for Istanbul, and then the whole Ottoman Empire would fall out of the war, and this would open up a new front in the south. Unfortunately, these well-laid plans went completely awry. At Kut, on the Tigris River, about 160 miles south of Baghdad, the British faced their first large-scale defeat of the war. 10,000 British soldiers surrendered. They were taken prisoner. Many of those soldiers were Indian recruits who'd been brought over from India and sent up this Tigris River under British command. Baghdad, this meant, was not captured until late in 1917, near the end of the war. The British attack on Istanbul was a complicated one. There are two straits leading up from the Aegean Sea into the Black Sea. First is the Straits of the Dardanelles. The British ships amassed in the Mediterranean and the Aegean Sea could not get through those straits. The Ottomans had heavy weapons and and cannons on each side of the straits, which would have devastated the ships. Therefore, the British decided to attack from the back of the Dardanelles at a battlefield called Gallipoli. February 1915 to January 1916, a tremendous battle was waged at Gallipoli. The British ships unloaded their soldiers, thinking that they would be able to march across the land and attack Istanbul from the back. But the Turks managed to get the high ground and pin the British down on the coastland. And this turned into a tremendous battle where 200,000 British troops were killed. It was also the moment which brought Ataturk, whose real name was Mustafa Kemal and later would call himself Father of the Turks, Ataturk. It turned him into a hero. He would later become the George Washington of Turkey, the father of Turkey. He rallied Turkish troops and was able to turn back the British. Having experienced defeat at Gallipoli, the British had to come up with a second plan. This was a much less expensive plan, but a much more difficult one. It was to divide the Ottoman Empire and conquer it. The British, in order to divide the Ottoman Empire, tried to rally the Arabs around Arab nationalism and to build up an Arab army that they could use to attack the Turks. At the same time as they were doing that, building an army down in Arabia, and this is famous Lawrence of Arabia, the British had also amassed an army in Cairo that was going to move across to Gaza, up to Jerusalem, and eventually to Damascus. The job of the Arabs was to attack from the other side of a long railroad that the Ottomans had built from Istanbul all the way down to Medina in the Arabian Peninsula. That railroad was used to bring Ottoman troops up and down and defend the Arab lands. So the Arab revolt, the Arab troops, were supposed to come up from Medina and Mecca along the eastern side of the railroad, attacking the railroad at numerous points in order to drive the Ottomans out as the British moved their troops up to Jerusalem and eventually Damascus. Jerusalem was taken in December 1917, Damascus on October 1918. This strategy ultimately worked. It led to the defeat of the Ottoman Empire, and which surrendered unconditionally, called the Mudros Armistice in October 1918. The British plan to build up Arab nationalism and what is called the Arab Revolt, this military, starts in Mecca. The Sharif of Mecca, Sharif Hussein, is a Hashemite governor of the province of Mecca, governor under the Ottoman Empire. The British made contact with him early on in the war and began discussing the possibility of an Arab revolt. Why Mecca? Why Sharif Hussein? First of all, the British strategy was if they could get an Arab pretender to the throne, to a new caliphate, they could use Islam against the Ottomans. Sharif Hussein seemed like the best candidate. He was the governor of Mecca, the holy city. He was a Hashemite, the tribe of Muhammad. So he's a direct descendant, which is the word Sharif means a member of the holy family of the Prophet. And this gave him extra legitimacy. He was also on the outs with the Ottoman Empire. And the British believed they could win him to his side, promise him a kingdom, and he would fight. He would rally Arab troops and be able to call jihad and rally Muslim troops as well. This was the strategy. Also, Mecca, the big railroad that the Ottomans had built down from Istanbul, did not reach beyond Medina, big city in central Arabia. It didn't reach to Mecca. So this meant that the British could organize the Arab tribes in Mecca without having the Ottomans be able to dump a big army right at their doorstep. They organized Arab Revolt, and it was able to move up through the desert towards Jerusalem and harass the Ottomans all the way through. But this left the British with a number of promises which are going to be at the heart of our next lecture, the three big treaties. The impact of World War I on the Middle East was tremendous. It destroyed the Ottoman Empire, which had ruled over the region for almost 400 years. In its place, a number of nation-states were built, borders rather haphazardly drawn that are being contested today in places like Syria, Kurdistan, Israel, Palestine. It encouraged Arab nationalism and put the British on the side of Arab nationalism. But promises were also made for independence in the Middle East, an independence that was going to be thwarted by both the British and the French, who took and occupied many of the Middle Eastern states through the new League of Nations in what were called the mandates. Mandates to act, in a sense, as a colonial power over places like Syria, Lebanon, which the French acquired, and Iraq, Jordan, Palestine, which the British acquired. And this left a legacy of colonialism and bitterness in the Middle East.